When you first go in, the communication courses and the beginning courses, they seem so great. They seem so helpful. And you start thinking, wow, this stuff is really nice. It actually is it works. And slowly but surely you become indoctrinated into Scientology thinking. And you start putting these filters on where you start thinking the way Hubbard tells you to think, rather than using any sort of critical thinking skill. Critical thinking is actually a bad thing in Scientology. They don't want you looking at things critically. They want you to adopt Hubbard's philosophy 100%, no change in anything around, just stick with it. So I did that. I worked for the Guardian's office. After I left there, I worked for the Office of Special Affairs for 14 years, and I was one of the bad guys. I was one of the people that investigated critics for the church. I went after them with covert and overt intelligence that I was taught by the church, stealing trash, looking up people's records, their criminal records, their court records, with the idea to silence them. That's what Scientology wants to do. That's why they want to know who Anonymous is and who's behind you. They want to silence you. And they do that by finding out maybe something in your past that you don't want known. Maybe some connection. Maybe your parents or a relative doesn't want you involved in this, or your wife, and they'd stop you from coming here if they knew. And Scientology uses that information to silence critics. And I did that for 14 years. I worked with the Office of Special Affairs. In 2000, I got a computer. And Scientology does not want you're allowed to have a computer if you're a public person, but they don't want you looking at anything critical on the internet. They tell you that it's live, that it's not good for you, that you won't continue up the bridge if you do this. Well, I went anyway. Yeah. And I started reading about what was going on at international management, what was going on from people who had left the cult and the stories they were telling. And it started to make sense. And the brainwash started falling off. And I started actually being able to look. And two major things happened. People say, what happened that finally made you read? Two things. The first is I was in a used bookstore. I was browsing around and I was looking for something to give my sister who was having trouble with her marriage. And I picked up a book and then I put it back down because I realized that if I gave my sister this book, I would be in trouble with the church, because the only advice I could give my sister as a good Scientologist was more Scientology. If I gave them a book written by a person who was involved with relationships and relationship counseling, that would be considered an enemy or doing something enemy of the church. So I put the book down and I thought to myself, when did I become afraid of this church? Why? Because my dad always said, you don't write in books, you don't burn books. Books will educate people. Books will enlighten people. You never do that. And so here I am in this bookstore, putting a book down because I'm afraid that my church will punish me for buying the book. And the next thing that happened was my same sister, she wanted me to build a website with her and sell some stuff. And because it wasn't Scientology related, I told her I couldn't do it because the church would get mad at me. And she said, why would the church do that? What's wrong? And again, the crack in the wall, if you will, of Scientologists thinking, wow, she's right, why can't I do this? And that's when I actually hit the internet and started reading about it. And about 3 years after I read about Scientology, I started posting anonymously through emailers as Peregrine. And I started telling what was going on inside the church. I started attending church events and reporting on it. And the church was looking for me. They were trying to figure out who I was. They actually sent somebody in to befriend me and find out who I was. And then that person told the church. A couple of days after that happened, the church sent my best friend, a woman who's from Boston here, She came to my home, and she basically told me that if I didn't shut up and stop posting to the internet, that she was going to apply the fair game policy of the church against me and do whatever it took to silence me. And I told her to basically bring it on. So a few days later, after that meeting, I got my own Religious Freedom Watch page, which is Scientology's hate site, where they investigate critics of Scientology, both ex-scientologists and people like Anonymous. And they investigated me thoroughly. They found my bankruptcy papers. They went to where I work. They took pictures of me. They basically tried to embarrass me with all this information and silence me. And instead, I just didn't care. It was so disgusting. My final coming out and speaking loudly, publicly, under my own name, was when a man named Chuck Beatty, who is a Scientology critic, who was in the C organization for 27 years, they actually went and took information from his parishioner folder. When you're in Scientology, one of the things that happens when you go into a counseling session is they write everything down. So if you give up your past indiscretions about your sex life, about maybe something you did that was illegal, this is all in writing now. Well, what they did with Chuck is they took all the information that he told them about his feelings about his sex life, his inhibitions, his everything, and they started publishing this crap on the web. This came from parishioner folders, and it was so disgusting. This is what they were trying to use against him to shut him up. It was so disgusting. That's the day that I came out publicly and said, that's it, I've had enough. These people are just despicable in trying to silence critics against them.